thank our panel as well.
my laws, my tax, my
controlling our borders. I also think that being part of the European Union
and financially catastrophic and ineffective European Union.
Just before I throw this out to the floor, just a couple of points, just wrapping in some of the things that the Minister mentioned and indeed that Michael mentioned. To Hamza in particular, the SNP talked a lot about Norway during the independence campaign. I've hardly heard it mentioned in this campaign. Norway, as everyone knows, is outside the EU, yet it's part of the European Economic Area. It retains the European Free Trade Agreement with access to the single market, yet it only adopts a quarter of EU law. It can agree its own trade deals. It's exempt from EU VAT rules. It's got sole control over its foreign affairs, and the European Court of Justice has no jurisdiction over it. And its fisheries policy too, yes, very true. Okay. It accepts the free movement of all EU workers, but has a unilateral break on immigration. Why wouldn't a similar arrangement work for the UK?
Yeah.
Hamza.
Yeah, I mean, it's a question. I mean, when we talked about the Norwegian example of Scottish independence referendum, remember we didn't talk about looking to emulate exactly everything that Norway absolutely did. Where we talked about it was in relation to an oil fund, and so there was talk about saving up when it's a good day in terms of oil prices, save up those oil revenues for when we have a bad day, or we currently have when it comes to oil revenues and the North Sea. But what I would say about Norway is, look, forget what I've got to say about Norway and its European relationship. Why don't you look at what the Norwegian government had to say about that? And so the former foreign minister of Norway said, you have to pay, but you have no say. So all these things that you've talked about, the 15% of EU laws now, the figure I have is a bit closer to 25%, but okay, let's take your figure of 15%. Sorry, a quarter of EU laws or free movement of travel, where they still have to accept various EU laws and directives that come their way. They still have to pay into it, but they have absolutely no say, not a single seat at the table, not any influence over how those laws are crafted. So I don't think that Norwegian model, there's other models too, there's the Icelandic model, there's a Swiss model you can look at, but all of these models have to accept some sort of European legislation, some sort of European directive. They have to accept some level of agreement with Europe, but they have absolutely no say whatsoever in how those laws are crafted. That's not the relationship I want in the UK or Scotland.
John Boyle.
Well, can I just say, I mean, this is frankly getting to the core of the matter. You choose to ignore Norway because it doesn't suit your dimension. Whilst you're sitting at the top table, the Norwegians are fishing the fish, catching the cod, landing the oil, and doing everything. They don't seem to me, if they're not at the top table, well, I don't really want to be at the top table, to be perfectly candid. I think they're a classic example of where they have got control of their own resources. As Nye Bevan just said about this country, only a country built on coal, surrounded by fish, could contrive to have a shortage of both. Because of the EU, we can't fish our own waters, and we can't mine our own coal because of environmental things, even capturing carbon. So it's absolutely, totally gets to the core of the matter. When you don't like something, you just seek to ignore it. Whereas Norway is a classic example. And just one thing that you said, Michael, in a very, very rounded speech, is that which hadn't occurred to me, is today is when we would have been independent. So the SNP was suggesting that we'd wrap up not only trade agreements, but all the constitutional agreements in 18 months, and we'd be off and running today, but we don't seem to be able to wrap up a few trade deals in 2 years. And I rest my case.
Nobody said that. I mean, you're so obsessed with the Scottish independence referendum. Let it go. We had the vote. We won it.
You won't accept it. We won it. No, I accept it.
Well, with that, Hamza, if I may, just before I come to Michael Moore, then, would you win a referendum now if we vote for Brexit in June?
I truthfully don't know if we would...
Would you call one, though?
Neither would I say that we would automatically call one. I think the First Minister has said that what you could do is get demands or precipitate demands for another referendum. I mean, I'll be honest and quite candid when it comes to the Scottish independence referendum. Clearly, and among some, and I would say a fair number of the business community, we didn't win that argument. But what I find interesting is when I talk about the European referendum, the amount of business people who say to me, look, if it's a choice of being independent and staying within Europe or being within the United Kingdom but out of Europe, I'll take my chances in being independent. Now, let me finish and then you can ask me a question, right? So when I hear that, I do think, well, there might well be demands for another referendum. Do I want those to be the circumstances where we're fighting a Scottish independence referendum? No, I do not. And the First Minister has said that herself. That's why we'll be campaigning not just for Scotland to stay within the European Union, but I hope the rest of the UK. And if the SNP can play a role in that, as the First Minister has been down to London to make some of those speeches, have that argument. If it's counterproductive, we'll stay away from the rest of the UK, fine. But if there's a role for us to play, then we'll happily play that.
Sorry, Michael Moore. Sorry, so 1 second, John. Just let Michael respond to that.
There was a time when I was as close to being a world expert on nephrops as was reasonable for somebody whose mind he thought was reasonably sane, because prawns were big business for the fishermen that I represented off the east coast of Berwickshire. The truth of the fishing is, A, are we really seriously going to be arguing that we want an economy based on fish? And B, that economy has changed out of all recognition, and if it was a free-for-all, as I think is the one would extrapolate, then I'm not sure how many jobs are actually attached to that. The more serious point is on energy, and the coal, the oil, all the different things that we have to factor in. I am very doubtful that if we were outside the European Union, we would find ourselves relieved of or released from the different carbon commitments that have been signed up to by the United Kingdom as part of the EU, but by so many different countries around the world. The Paris Agreement last December set very aggressive targets in terms of carbon reduction. The world is shifting away from carbon, and whether we could do it at a different speed or whatever, it's just another complicating factor, I think. The point for people to assess about the Norwegian model surely is this. They pay a lot of money for the privilege of accepting regulation that is agreed within Brussels when they're not actually there in the room. There's a separate question, which is about how the United Kingdom engages in Brussels on a day-to-day basis. Does it get the best deal for businessmen like John and others, men and women in this room who are really sometimes struggling to understand why the regulation has come? I think there is a chance to really shape this debate now in terms of what is good for business. What aspects of competitiveness is it that you want to see? And particularly here in a legal services firm, the services market in the European Union is underdeveloped, and yet we in Britain would have something great to offer it if we could persuade them to remove the barriers. There's a lot more potential there, and it's on our doorstep, it's a lot nearer and a lot more straightforward to deal with, I would suggest, than if we took ourselves out of the European Union and didn't, by the way, in the course of that, uninvent Europe. It would still exist, and we would still have to work and trade with it, having put ourselves, I would suggest, at a slight disadvantage.
Okay, I'd just like to try and throw it over to the floor now. I know John's chomping at the bit here to speak. Gentleman there in the middle. Can we see about 8 rows back? Yep, holding his hand up now. Very good, thank you, sir. Could you just introduce yourself, sir, first, then, yeah?
In this room have lived, I would suggest, in an era of unparalleled opportunity for our skills, our labour and UK trade. So if we leave, what's the opportunity that we're not capturing already and that we wouldn't have if we stayed?
Well, one of the things that we haven't touched upon, and quite frankly, I think that we need to touch upon, well, sorry, I do, with all due respect, you did touch upon it, is immigration. I think any logical person, and the problem is talking about immigration, you're branded as being a racist, which I am clearly not. Our Hamilton portfolio virtually single-handedly ran a charity called Children in Distress for catering to the children in Romania who had AIDS. So I spent 10 years going back and forward to Romania. But the simple fact of the matter is, knowing Romania terribly well, and so that I was one of the first proponents of the when I used to be a member of something that doesn't exist now called the Labour Party. We proposed the national minimum wage, and everyone was doing a sort of a frightening thing that there was so much unemployment. I'm delighted that the minimum wage is now embedded in our psyche and is increasing, because I think it's fair, it's just, and it's reasonable. But the simple fact of the matter is that if the minimum wage comes to £10, which I heartily applaud, and you have got 22 million Romanians who don't even have a minimum wage, say it's £2, the amount of labour we simply cannot absorb in our services, in our hospitals, in our education, that level of immigration. And if you can't control your borders, you can't control your country. This is a big issue. A colleague of mine was talking to a very, very senior, I have to say unnamed Conservative, and said one of the reasons we just might win this is because the EU have done something catastrophic. They're about to sign up a deal to give virtually unfettered access to 70 million Turkish people. Now, in my package holiday days, I had tremendous relations with Turkish people, where you've got 70 million people in a destabilised government who will be heading this way. We can't absorb this level of immigration. Even on that basis, you have to think again. We're not so bad up here in Scotland, but in the southeast of England, where I've got printing factories, every single social service is under the most amazing strain. Control your borders. It is a fundamental of being in a country. If you can't control your borders, you cease to be a country, in my view.
Can I just comment on the immigration point? I mean, I noticed that it wasn't really an answer to your question about the opportunities, because I think, as Michael put it very well in his presentation, that we would be at a comparative disadvantage being outside of the European Union, because you can't pretend that it doesn't exist. And at the moment, we can continue to do trade deals, be it with the United States, or be it with Canada, be it with the ASEAN countries or anywhere else as well. So I noticed that you didn't really get an answer. But on the immigration point, I just want to make a couple of points. I mean, I don't think people that have concerns about immigration are racist by any stretch. I mean, you'll get some who obviously are, but the point is the vast majority of people that have immigration concerns have very legitimate concerns. But what we haven't done as politicians, what we failed to do, I think, is explain some of the positives that immigration brings. I mean, just take EU citizens. And look, I try to deal with the stats and the figures and the facts, because there's no point in me trying to tell you that immigration is great without trying to give you some of the independent research on that. So take, for example, University College London. You know, UCL, highly respected institution. They did a real in-depth study of EU migration specifically, not non-EU, but specifically EU migration. And it showed that between 2001 and 2011, EU migrants gave a net contribution, you can shake your head all you want, but these are facts, net contribution of £20 billion.
The workers, not the dependents.
EU
Not
citizens.
The dependents. The dependents took more out.
Now you can shout, and you can
wave
wave your finger.
John, one second.
You're not quoting us.
So 20.
John, just let the Minister at least make the point.
My point is that EU citizens contribute. Not only that, look at Scotland's demographics as a country. Our demographics, our population historically was declining. The only reason that has been reversed in the last few years is because of migration. It's not because births vastly outweigh deaths, although it happens slightly to a small margin. It's because of migration. We have an ageing population in this country. We have a skills gap, workforce gap there in terms of the working age population. Yes, let's train young Scots who live here with the skills. Let's arm them with those skills to fill some of those gaps. But there's certain professions they're not going into. Engineering being a classic example, where there's not hundreds but thousands of engineering jobs that aren't being filled by Scots, because we can't force Scots to go into engineering. For some reason or another, perhaps they're not attracted to it and attracted to other fields. But we need migration in this country. 90% of Scotland's population growth, and I'll end on this point, between now and 2040 will come through migration. And yes, let's control it. Let's ensure that migrants don't all come to one part of the United Kingdom. Let's think about how we can disperse that, how we can incentivise and attract them to other parts, be it more rural areas perhaps, as well as the urban areas. But let's not for a minute play into this dog whistle politics that thinks immigration is dreadful, because it absolutely is not.
Just before I ask Michael to comment, I just wonder, can we just have a show of hands? How many people here believe that we should actually have tighter control of our borders in terms of EU migration? Anyone? 1, 2? That's it. That's about 10% maybe of the audience. Michael Moore.
The question surely for business leaders like yourselves is how you would control those borders. And one level where it's people who are moving within the European Union freely to do it. I hope, John, I don't think John was quite suggesting that all 22 million Romanians were about to up sticks and move to the United Kingdom on account of the national living wage. But that freedom is important, and it works two ways. There's the other type of migration, which tragically we're seeing on our television screens night after night, where people are leaving behind war zones, areas which are being devastated by what is being argued are the effects of climate change and the like. And whether by leaving the European Union, where people think there's an easy way into the southern end of Europe, and then folk come up and try and then get across to the United Kingdom, whether losing the cooperation we have with the French that protects us from a mad scramble across the Channel to British shores, whether it's beyond reason that people will find other ways to get to the UK. I'm just not really clear how the practicalities of managing our own borders can be worked through. And I think if that's to be set aside, really it does matter that businesses understand where their workforces come from, where their suppliers' workforces come from, particularly in this age of outsourcing, where a lot of big businesses are not directly responsible for their own headcount. Knowing how much of an impact on your business model it would have if people were no longer able to move freely across at all levels of the business, I think is something that people need to address over the next few weeks.
Okay, next question, fourth row. Gentleman there, please arm up. Wonderful.
Donald McRae, economist. Michael Moore talked a lot about the PwC study for the CBI, and that was done on a UK basis. Now, perhaps I could ask him very, very nicely, perhaps you could persuade PwC to do one for Scotland. That might be quite interesting. Now, we've heard about some of the effects on the Scottish economy from policies such as common fisheries, common agricultural policy. You might also include, of course, the huge amount of structural funds which are invested in Scotland. And, of course, just to mention another very important one, the access to research pools by our Scottish universities. So my question is not to say whether these are good or bad or whether they're positive or negative for Scotland, but if we do have Brexit, what is the risk that they might be replaced by something which is actually not quite so beneficial to Scotland? Is that a real risk?
Sorry.
Well, I would have thought...
One second, John. Sorry, just Michael answer that one first, if you wouldn't mind.
Donald may well have noticed that the CBI very kindly paid for that study, so if anybody wishes to pay PwC to do the Scottish study, we'll be very happy to get right in there.
Okay, over to you, John. Sorry.
My son's at St Andrews University, one of my daughters just about to go there, so I've spent a lot of time there in the last 2 or 3 years. I suspect that an institution has been there since 1415, and there's an international centre of excellence will continue as it did before the European Union was even invented, and after I suspect that it will very little affect. But we get research because we are a centre of excellence. This does go to the core of thinking that because we leave the European Union, you made some reference to say that we can't believe the European Union doesn't exist. The European Union will continue to exist. It is a bloated, flawed, proliferate, inefficient organisation, and they're trying to grapple with the Euro's problems, which no one's mentioned. All the CBI and all the business leaders and all the Caroline McGills of EasyJet and all these cosy, well-paid, overpaid FTSE 100 leaders who are all coming in for remaining in are the same people who suggested not a short time ago that we should join the ill-fated euro. Just remember that when you next listen to the £12 million paid chief executive who wants to cosy remain in the status quo.
Hamza.
The only point I would make, in some respects, John, of course, is correct. World-class research, would continue. I've got no doubt that Scottish universities would continue to be able to find other avenues and other funding mechanisms. But there's a real reason why universities who, for example, took a very neutral stance during the Scottish independence referendum have this time come out to support continued membership of the European Union, because that Horizon 2020 money is hugely important. But I want to go to the nub of what I thought your question was. And I spoke to a Northern Irish colleague recently about this. Both Northern Ireland and Scotland benefit, you could say, disproportionately from other parts of the UK from European funds, be it structural funds, regional assistance, etc., etc. Some of the funds you mentioned, and of course the common agricultural policy, as well as the fisheries policy. The question is, if we were to leave the European union, do we think, and this is something you have to ask yourself, do you genuinely think the UK government would be willing to pay that amount to Scotland, to Northern Ireland, to subsidise agriculture, to subsidise fisheries, etc., etc.? Now, some people here might argue, yes, the UK government would do that. I pay my doubts, as people would say, that would be the case.
By the way, the last time I read CERN, the biggest investigation, was located in Switzerland, not in the EU. They don't seem to have any difficulty attracting what I could arguably call very much a centre of excellence.
Any hands up? Your question? Yes, lady there in the middle of the centre row.
Hilary Kane from BPI. A question on business regulation, if I may. It's an argument deployed by both sides. For the ins, there's reference to a lot of protections that people benefit from as employees, courtesy of what European legislation has sent our way. For the outs, there's reference to a mountain of regulation that the EU imposes on us. I'd like people to look forward realistically to what they think it would look like if we came out, because I personally don't think that we're suddenly going to abolish all existing laws and start from scratch. So how much difference are we going to see going forward if we aren't in Europe?
Michael Moore.
I think that gets to the nub of one of the business critical issues. For the reason that I said it earlier, I just don't think that politicians will leave the void of regulation that is currently in place, partly because by instinct politicians like to do stuff, but also because there'll be pretty important areas, in terms of financial sector, energy and others, where a lot of existing rules are set on a European-wide basis. So if they're going to be either cut and paste and used as if they were British regulations initially to make it easier, then we've still got that regulation, and then you've got a big set of debates going on afterwards about how you change it. That may be exactly, legitimately what John and those who support his cause want to see. But I don't think there's a kind of get-out-of-jail-free card here which offers business a release from the onerous regulations that pretty well in this room will be able to mention. The other thing that's really important is that modern trading agreements are not simply about tariffs and quotas. Critically, they're also about the standards that you apply to the goods or services that you are trading. And given the importance of our continental neighbours to our trading arrangements and our economy, I believe we're still going to need to address the issues of common standards of products and services across the European Union if we wish to avoid everything that is produced in Britain being inspected in a big warehouse on a dockside in Rotterdam, Calais or wherever it might go. We will therefore, by and large, seems to me, have to keep a body of regulation that looks remarkably similar to what we have at the moment, simply because that regulation isn't there to choke your business, but to create as level a playing field as possible in the competition within the European Union in that particular area of trade. Now, there are a lot of things that we suffer from at the moment. I mentioned professional services is one part of that, where mutual recognition, common standards, either one of these are elusive, and therefore the services market in the European Union is not nearly as well advanced as that for goods. The question is that a good thing or a bad thing? And if we're to improve that, will it be through greater common regulation or by less regulation? I'll leave you to make that.
Just for I ask John to respond, just a couple of points. It's worth probably pointing out, as most people here are aware, that a good deal of trade legislation actually starts at a global level above the EU, in bodies such as the G20, where the UK would have a strong influence. And just another couple of figures, if I may. In 2014, Scotland's non-oil and gas exports to the EU were around 11.5 billion. That's down 8% on the previous year. By contrast, exports to the UK, the rest of the UK, were almost 50 billion, 4 times as much as as the EU exports, and a 3% increase on the previous year.
At the risk of being slightly cheeky, I'm a recovering politician, and I'm happily moving away from quoting one year's example as the killer fact or argument in a particular case. I think you need to look over at the trends in both those cases, Michael.
Well, the trend is actually down by 10% over the last decade.
I would suggest to you there are other ways in terms of addressing the productivity puzzle, the competitiveness agenda within the EU and particularly in the UK, that would be about those relations with Europe getting more clear-cut, but also deeper over time. By the way, the G20 is not the source of most of those trade things, it's the WTO, and anybody who's followed that over recent years will have seen that the WTO actually is a body able to create global trade deals has been proving quite weak and ineffective. So you've seen the rise of America creating regional deals with the Pacific, looking to do a regional deal with the EU. And again, it's the big players at the table, not one relatively small country like Britain off on its own, who get the attention from America and some of the biggest trading partners we have.
John Ball.
And you mentioned the general issue of regulation, etc. I think there's a bit of a myth here. The United Kingdom has got a very, very, very strong record going back many, many decades of human workers' rights. We were the first country to introduce a civil partnership, for example. Loads of the other Neanderthal countries have had to follow us. And what I think everyone is generally accepted is the European Court of Human Rights interfere. Some of the stuff that these people do are really a lot of judges sitting in The Hague, and I'm not disparaging the profession, but it does seem to be they come up with the most ludicrous decisions on a wide range of things. It's almost now a new legal appeal. And I say, because I want to get back to basics, if you want to control your own laws, be British. If you want your laws to be decided by some unelected people in The Hague, please go into the European Union. This is one of the fundamental matters you must decide. And it's one of the things, the reason that I am so passionately about remaining and getting out of the EU, because I don't want to be controlled by unelected people in The Hague. I would take my chances with Westminster. I think all of us in business complain here and there. We in our printing business complain about health and safety. We go, my God, another regulation, and we go on about. We employ 165 people, and we're quite a big factory. But probably we put up with it. We put it in, and we realise probably it was right in the end. I think life gets more complex. Things get more complex, and regulation. I think people are more upset about the human legislation and the business legislation. It's when people are appealing on trivial, absurd, completely ridiculous things, and the European Court of Human Rights are upholding this and upholding that, and basically really interfering with our civil liberties. That's what I believe.
Okay. The last word, please, to Hamza.
I mean, I just think there's so little in the way of facts coming from John, who's arguing for the exit, that I find it astounding that is the case to leave. I think that if you looked at Scotland's position, there's a lot of things that I disagree with in terms of Prime Minister and his renegotiation package, but there's also things that I agree with, and I thought his push for competitiveness and for less red tape and for not more regulation but smarter regulation, I thought from the Prime Minister and from the UK government was the right position to take, and get the full support of the Scottish government on that. But regulation hasn't been awful for our businesses. Yes, it can be cumbersome at times, and I've heard that from business people in my own constituency. But what I would say is that there's been some driving up standards across the continent has been a good thing. And not only has it been good for business, but I'd say very good for the consumer. Taking fridges as an example, the fact that now they're more energy efficient across Europe, well, that helps to save the bills and the energy bills of consumers right across the European continent. So I think when it comes to regulation, I would say look, don't think that if we leave the European Union that somehow we're going to be in a regulation-free zone if it's regulation that bothers you. Yeah, don't think that businesses, for example, don't cease to be when another government takes over. So you might think that Conservatives are light touch on regulation, and that's their reputation. Fine, but the UK government won't be a Conservative government forevermore. There'll be other governments that will come in that might take a completely different. And so, it's not that there will be a void of regulation and somehow it will just be allowed to remain that way. So I just think the driving up common standards is really, really important. I think it helps the businesses, but I think it also helps the consumer, which is a good thing. So, and when it comes to those countries that are not within the European Union, and I just wanted to check this when John mentioned Norway and the example of fishing. I just quickly checked because I wasn't sure, but I was right that actually they have quotas as well when it comes to haddock, when it comes to herring, when it comes to cod. And so even if you're outside of Europe, you're going to have to probably, if you're going to have an agreement to do trade with European countries, you're not going to be allowed to lower standards. TTIP is an example of that. The European Commission have said, well, while we're doing a trade deal with the United States, and I have some concerns over that, but where we're doing those trade deals with the United States, we're not going to allow the US to lower our standards. It's going to be about the US coming up to European standards. And so the point is, So the point is, when it comes to Scotland's regulation or UK regulation, when it was outside of the European Union, if we were to have a trade deal with the European Union or be bilateral with Germany or France or Spain, we would have to ensure that we're up to that regulation standard. They're not going to come down to our standards. So,
okay. Well, thank you. I'm afraid we're running slightly over time, so I think we'll call it a day at that, if I may. I was hoping to give you all a rebuttal, but we'll have to cancel that now. I think we can all agree on one thing, whatever our views on Europe are, is that we've had a fantastically lively and thought-provoking hour or so with our panellists, so I'm sure you'll join me in thanking them again for their efforts this morning. I'd like to thank our panel as well.
My laws, my tax,
Controlling our borders.
I also think that being part of the European Union
and financially catastrophic and ineffective European Union.